Jim Smucker, he's our first keynote speaker today. First met Jim, he walked into my gym, and this guy wears plenty of hats. The first time I ever saw him, though, he walked in wearing one of those runner's hats. He's got the small bill, and I saw him walk in, and I said, "Are you in the right place?" Runner, not lifter, but I was wrong. I'm glad I didn't judge a book by its cover. He had a big drive to do everything properly. He wanted to get better, and that's just kind of par for the course for Jim. He's done plenty of other things in the community. He's coached high school sports teams. He's been a part of profit and not-for-profit boards. He has a PhD and master's in management, and he has even sat as the dean of admission or dean of education on EMU's campus. So pretty big deal here. Pretty excited to listen to him. And without further ado, I'm going to give you Jim Smucker.
Folktale about a dangerous seacoast where shipwrecks often occurred. On that coast was a little life-saving hut, very crude and with only one boat. However, there were a few devoted members who gave themselves day and night at the risk of their own lives to rescue those who had been shipwrecked. Soon, this little station became famous because so many were saved. Others wanted to become associated with this very famous enterprise and gave time and money and effort to buy new boats and to train more crews. After a while, some members were unhappy with such a poorly equipped center, so they enlarged the building and put in better furniture. The life-saving station became a popular gathering place, and members used it as a club. As time went on, fewer members were interested in the dangerous life-saving missions and instead hired crews to do the work. However, in respect for the initial purpose of the club, life-saving images were prominent in the decorations, and there was even a symbolic lifeboat in the room where they had initiations. About this time, there was a large shipwreck. The hired crews brought in the cold, half-drowned, and dirty people, and the club was trashed. As a result, the property committee had a shower house built outside where the future victims could be cleaned up. A split developed among the members at the next meeting. Most of them wanted to stop the life-saving activities that were a hindrance to their social life. Some members insisted that life-saving was their priority. The majority prevailed, and the minority was told they could begin their own life-saving station down the coast. They did. As the years went by, the new station went through exactly the same changes as the old. It evolved into a club, and yet another life-saving station was created. History repeated itself, and after a number of years on that coast, visitors could find a number of exclusive clubs along the shore. Shipwrecks were still frequent, but most of the victims drowned. One day, a newcomer came to the community and began to ask questions about the mission of the life stations. Why do you wait in your plush rescue stations for ships to crash? Wouldn't it be better, he suggested, to build a lighthouse to warn the ships away from the dangerous rocks? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. The old-timers laughed. A lighthouse would be very expensive, and there was no evidence that a lighthouse would do any good. Besides, that is not what we do, they exclaimed. There will always be shipwrecks, and so we must be prepared to rescue the victims. The story of the life-saving station is a metaphor for the changes that businesses of all shapes and sizes experience. It is a dramatic portrayal of the need for businesses to stay focused on their mission, to be both maintainers and growers, to grow in ways that keep the feeling small as it grows larger, and to lead with a humble spirit. This morning at the GAP Conference 2023, Jim will further discuss these lessons of the life-saving stations as they relate to growing our businesses.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's great to be here to talk about how all of us together can avoid the fate of the life-saving station. First of all, let's give Chris and his team a round of applause for the great work they do to organize this conference. any of us who do events like this, we know there's a lot going on as we put conferences like this together. Well, as the narrator said, we want to talk about 4 things this morning, 4 key ways in terms of growth and how we can avoid the fate of the life-saving station. So staying focused on our core mission while evolving and adapting our products, being both maintainers and growers of our business, growing in ways that keep the feeling small as we grow larger, and finally leading with a humble spirit. The life-saving station core mission was to save lives, not rescue drowning people. As time and circumstances changed, they lost sight of this mission. Had they stayed focused on saving lives rather than rescuing drowning people, they would have took the advice of the stranger that came to town. There are growth opportunities awaiting us if we understand the difference between our mission and our products and services. And I want to give you a story from my past life. Years ago, I was in business in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in a family business with my brothers and my father. And we were in the hotel business. Our mission was to enhance lives and provide comfort, to enhance the lives of our employees and to provide comfort for our guests. We had about 200 hotel rooms we wanted to rent every night. And so we thought we were in the hotel business. Well, in the mid-2000s, from about 2003 to 2007, times were really good. Business was good, we were very profitable, and we kind of thought that was going to last forever. And then there was 2 things that happened that really changed things for us. First of all, the internet came along with booking engines, so Booking.com, Expedia, et cetera, and they started to give people lots of information about hotel rooms. So now the consumer had much more information than they used to have, and they could price shop and compare much more easily. Hotel rooms started to become a commodity. In other words, people were price shopping a lot more. Secondly, 2008 and 2009, the Great Recession came along and was really a tough time for us. Really struggled generating cash during that time. And so we had to figure out how to adapt to that. Nothing in our mission statement said we were renters of hotel rooms. It was about enhancing lives and providing comfort. So pretty quickly, we figured out that really the business we were in was the event business. We started creating events to give people excuses to come and stay in our hotel rooms the day before or the day after. And so we created things. We had a large banquet facility. We put a theater. We added theater to that room. We created things as crazy as banquets in a cornfield, and people would come and do a banquet in a cornfield. We started foodie tours. We started a half marathon that on the slowest weekend of the year between April and November, and now we sell that out like 7 months in advance. We sell our hotel rooms out. So we understood we had to change and adapt around our mission. We had to get over the fact and not think of ourselves as hoteliers, but we were there to enhance lives and provide comfort, and you can do that in a variety of ways. I want to mention here, too, that 9 out of 10 business startups or initiatives fail. That's a number that some folks have crunched the numbers on that. 9 out of 10 new initiatives are not successful. So we need to get to bat a lot, okay? We need to be constantly experimenting around our mission, trying new things in miniature, piloting things constantly to see if every once in a while we can get a hit, because if 9 out of 10 times things aren't going to be successful, we better try a lot, okay? Second point for this morning, be both maintainers and growers. And I want to use the product life cycle here pretty prominently in the next few minutes, and I'll explain more of that in a minute. Unlike the life-saving stations who struggled to maintain their mission of saving lives as they grew, as healthy businesses, we want to be both maintainers and growers around our mission. I think of the life cycle curve almost daily. If we don't have a little anxiety in our lives because of the changes that are taking place in our economy today, we're not paying attention. So what are some of the characteristics of this life cycle? I want to explain this a bit. So we have growth on this side, time here. So businesses, products, people, animals, plants, we all follow a similar cycle as we go through our lives. We start here, we grow, or we're born, or we start a new product, It grows. After a while, it starts to level off and mature, as we do as people, and you start down the other side and decline and eventually die. Now, it is possible, and some businesses do this, some businesses stay right here at point A for a period of time, and that's some of what we're going to talk about in the next few minutes here. As we change along this life cycle, these systems have predictable behaviors. At each stage, there are problems we must overcome, and if we know where we're at, we can be proactive with this. At point A on this curve, all the information that's coming to us is saying we're doing a great job. That's how I felt back in about 2005. Like things were really going well. We can't screw this up. We're smart. You know, it's a lot of good things are happening. At point B is oftentimes we're on the decline, and that's often when we change, when we're in crisis or when we sense that things aren't going well. The key is to start new curves or new products when we're at point A rather than wait until we're at point B. Because at point A, we're changing out of strength. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. And the key is to start and create our own obsolescence before the marketplace does it to us or a competitor does it to us. So let me tell you one of my favorite stories about Steve Jobs and Apple. So Steve, this is about 2005, they're working on the iPhone. And those of us who are old enough to remember an iPod, some of you remember an iPod, it was I had the first original iPod, it was a music player about this big, and I could put 500 songs on that thing. And that grew into becoming Apple's top-selling product in terms of units sold, not sales, but units sold. It was a top-selling product in the late 1990s, early 2000s. So they're having this conversation, Steve and some of his engineers, and Steve's idea was to wrap the music player, the iPod, into the iPhone, which we know that he did, and now with our smartphones we can play music. One of his engineers says to him, "But Steve, if we do that, it'll kill the iPod." And Steve's response was, "Yes, I know. We will make it obsolete before our competition does." Now just think about that a minute. Would you be willing to take your top-selling product today and obsolete it? That's innovation. And we know the rest of the story. I think the iPhone is perhaps the top-selling product of all times. Well, unlike the life-saving, wrong one. Different stages of a company call for different kinds of leadership. What's required at each stage? So let's just work our way through this a bit. So these are different stages along this curve that a company would go through. So startup phase. I've been a part of several startups during my time. It's an entrepreneurial phase. Some people are really good at startups and being entrepreneurial. We know, those of you who have started businesses, what this is like. It's chaotic. You don't plan or think a lot. You have an idea, you develop a plan for a business, and then you initiate that plan. But now when you're in the throes of that, you're not thinking a lot, you don't have time to plan, you don't have budgets, those kinds of things. Often in a startup phase, it's chaos. And so much of the success depends on the entrepreneur and maybe a few people around him or her. Okay? So you start up the business. As time goes on, if you're successful and you have a product that people like, you come into what I call a more sales-oriented phase. At this stage, the company is like a crawling infant. I have a 9-month-old granddaughter hanging out with her last weekend, and she's crawling all over the place, getting into all kinds of things. Not a lot of direction in her life. She's just crawling and enjoying that. And so again, here at this stage, not a lot of planning and organizing necessarily. The organization responds to opportunities. It wants to sell as much as it can. Sales are equated with success at this stage. Profit margins are not paid a lot of attention to, oftentimes at this stage. Now, if the organization wants to survive, it needs to start to turn those sales into profits. This stage requires a very different set of skills. You need systems. You have to pay attention to gross margins. You have to start to improve your profit margins. You need to become more disciplined. Sometimes you might even slow growth down a little bit so you can get better organized. Very few people have the skills to be both an entrepreneur and a manager of detail and discipline. There are some, but it's pretty rare. And so at this stage, the entrepreneur needs to start giving way to folks who can organize the business for him or her. And that's really difficult. But if you're going to move into this profitable stage, it's required. Now, if the entrepreneurial edge starts to wane and you just focus more on just the managerial side and the discipline side, you lose the spirit of creativity and innovation and your willingness to change. Entrepreneurs love change because change means opportunity. At times, when the organization starts to get into decline, the customer even starts to get in the way of doing business. You've seen organizations like this, right? Where you feel like as the customer, like they don't really want your business, like you're in the way. In a growing company, problems are seen as opportunities. In a dying company, opportunities are seen as problems. For the life-saving stations, they lost their entrepreneurial mindset. The thought of building a lighthouse just didn't compute with them, okay? They were no longer into initiating or starting new things. Now, what I want to do here for a few minutes is just give about 5 minutes for you to just huddle up with a couple other people. And I want you to reflect on where you think your stage is, what stage you think your business is in. And secondly, I want you to talk a little bit about what type of leadership is needed to move your company at this time along the curve. So, what stage are you in, and what do you think is needed at this point in your company to move you along the curve? So I want you just to huddle up a little for a few minutes and just have that conversation with a person or two around you. And kind folks, I'm really going to be interested in what you have to say about this. Now, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but just have a conversation with folks around you on these two questions, and we'll call us back together in just a few minutes. Let's just take one more minute. Okay. I want to say again and emphasize, because the stages in the life cycle are predictable and happen over and over again. As I said earlier, this is a template of nature, how things kind of change and evolve. Because they're predictable, if we as owners or as managers can be proactive, there are preventable measures we can do to deal with the future in our organizations. It can tell us where we need to create new products or reinvent our business model. So understanding where you're at is very important. Now this next slide, this is one of my favorite expressions. The seeds of the opposite are planted in the present. I've learned this in business. I've learned this, Justin said I'm an ultra runner. I've experienced this many times in running. When you're running along and doing well, all of a sudden you could lose energy. And if you work through that very difficult time, the body responds and you can again run well. Same thing in business. So I would love to have 2003 to 2007 back again. Because as I said earlier, we got sloppy. The seeds of a downturn were planted in how we responded then. And then again in 2008, 9, and 10, the most creative time in my professional career, when we were doing new events and really working at reinventing our business. I would prefer not to have to be in that kind of time again. And I think about this almost weekly, I said, or daily, is because, at time we're on a growth curve. I mean, for those of us who are in the industry that we're in, whether it's in cabinet making or construction right now, the last 3-4 years have been a real growth time. And I'm scared, it scares me some, because what seeds are we planting today at time that could lead us down the other side of that curve? Now I want to explain 2 more slides relative to the life cycle here. The paradox of success is what got you where you are won't keep you there, okay? So what I was just talking about with the seeds of the opposite. So what we want to do is at point A, we want to create new products, new businesses, new curves, okay? This stripe part here represents confusion. Because when you're at point A and you go to your team and say, we need to change and think differently, they're going to look at you and say, what? Things are going well. Why should we change now? That's a very difficult part of being a leader, is to try and initiate change before you need to. And also, I think it's a big part of the art of leadership, is how do we create a sense of urgency around change when things are going really, really well. What we want to end up with is a curve that looks like this, or I call it the regeneration curve. Continual reinvention of our products and services, not relying on what made the previous generation profitable. Now, if I look back at our business in Lancaster in the 2000s, my dad started that business in 1968, and it started with a single hotel. And here we are in 2003, 4, and 5, still relying on that business as our predominant income as a family, as a family business. And that was a mistake. Each generation, we need to be reinventing our businesses if you're in a family business here today. Let me tell you a story of a friend of mine. About a month ago, I was visiting with a friend in southeastern Pennsylvania, has a very sizable business, second generation family business. His dad and uncle started the business. $2.5 billion business with a B. And a year and a half ago, he sells, so they had 2 businesses at that time, and he sells the one that his dad and uncle started which was very profitable for many years for the family. Okay? But he started to have the feeling like, the margins were starting to slip. Other people were coming in and starting to hammer them on price. But it wasn't way down in decline yet. It was just more at that mature stage. He sells it, keeps his other business, and with the proceeds of that sale, he buys a new business on the up curve. He's now at $1.5 billion in sales, and he showed me his financials. He's making more money now than what he was at $2.5 billion. That's an example of what I'm talking about. Reinventing yourself before the customer and the marketplace requires you to do so. Let's move on to the next point. Grow in ways that keep the feeling small as we grow large. One of the most important decisions we can make, I think, as leaders is how do we divide so we can multiply? Our community, I don't know if you saw the article about 2 months ago in the Times Record. I think I have that right. Times Record, right? The Millersburg newspaper. There's an article on small businesses in Ohio. And Holmes County and Wayne County were by far the leaders in small businesses per capita in our state. Second data I'll point you to is COVID. During 2020 and 2021, our community grew at the highest growth rate of businesses in the state of Ohio. No one else was even close. Part of the answer, I think, lies in the way we grow and develop our businesses here in this community. And I want to use Century Components as a case study for this. So I got Jeff Miller's okay to share this with you this morning. So Jeff started that spider plant pot, we're going to say, is Jeff's business. Okay, Jeff started with 2 other people in a shop and had an idea, and soon they had demand for their products. So Jeff Century manufactures components for kitchens, for cabinets. So they had this idea, and Jeff had to decide, how much he's going to invest and people he's going to hire, that kind of thing. And there's components to that business that someone else was already doing. Okay, so Jeff decided to create an offshoot of his spider plant and outsource some of the components of his product to somebody else. So he starts an offshoot connected to Jeff's center pot. In time, the demand continued to grow, and it overwhelmed this new shop that he outsourced to. So that shop decided to outsource to 2 other shops. So now Jeff's company looks like this. The main pot, and these 3 over here creating components for his products. Century does the assembly and the finishing and the marketing of the components for kitchen cabinets, okay? Things that the offshoots aren't necessarily able to do. As he grew over time, Jeff continued to add offshoots, and today he has 8 different offshoots. Many companies in our community grow in this way. Some of you here may use this model. Let's talk a little bit about the characteristics. What are the characteristics of growing in this way? Well, as I said, the center provides for things that the offshoot couldn't do on their own. Century provides access to markets and that the other companies do not have access to. The offshoots don't totally rely on Century. These folks can outsource to other people as well. There could be connectors here to other pots in the community. As a result, the model is much more resilient. If Jeff were to have a downturn and this pot here, this offshoot doesn't rely completely on Jeff, and as someone else over here they're working with, their business won't go up and down as fast as if they were totally reliant on just Jeff or their own products. Jeff also said that during the heyday of 2020 and 2021, when things were way too busy and he couldn't keep up with demand, he said if he'd have had this all on his own, if everything would have been in that center pot, he couldn't have sold as many products as he did. Now, demand had still outstripped his ability to produce because of how crazy busy it was. But he said to me, if everything would have been in my pot, I couldn't have produced near as many of the products that I did. At the same time, Jeff does give up some margin, okay? Obviously, these shops have to make money, so Century gives up some margins to these shops. But he says over the long run, he gives up a little margin, but it creates a lot more resiliency for him. And finally, these cords provide the connection and kind of the communication and trust, which are really critical in this model. Jeff doesn't have contracts with these folks out here. He even has more covenants. They kind of have agreements and understandings of how they're going to work together. And it really relies heavily on communication and trust. I have also some interesting data that shows that when we increase in size, cooperation, communication, and trust take a hit. So no matter what size your business is, cooperation, communication, and trust over time as you grow will decrease some if you're not intentional about that. So just know as you grow your business, you're going to need to spend more time thinking about communication, cooperation, and trust, and do things differently to make sure that that stays good over time. There's actually, the data that I have shows at 150 people, it really starts to drop off. Now, I know a lot of you here don't have 150 employees, but the concept is the same, and I have to think, too, it's partly why the life-saving stations started to lose some focus on their mission because of their growth. I also think it's very interesting that in our community, the Amish are a model of this. When an Amish church district gets to about 150 people, which is about as many people can fit in a shop or a house for church, they start another district. And I don't think, I've talked to several people, like they're not looking at the research on this, it's just naturally what they've found out over the years, that when you get to a certain size, you start to lose that sense of community. And so pay attention as you grow to those areas and make sure you're doing things to reinforce that. Well, the last point, lead with a humble spirit. And this has to do with both employees and customers. Had the life-saving station been humble and yielded to both their clients and the person who had the alternative idea of building a lighthouse, they would have built a lighthouse, which would have resulted in hundreds of lives being saved, which was their original mission. So about 2 months ago, I'm golfing with two local entrepreneurs who are second generation of a family business that frankly right now is growing really strong and really well. Really an outstanding business in our community. I don't want to mention their name because they would want to be humble about this. So in any case, I'm halfway through the round and I said to them, what would you attribute your success to in your business? And here is what they said. We have learned to be humble with both employees and customers. We listen deeply and try to truly understand their perspective and interest. End of quote. Through their simply listening to their customers, they have created a model that is super easy for their customers to do business with them. And this is a large purchase that their customers make. But they have made it super easy because they have really humbled themselves and listened to what they have to say. As I was listening to them, my mind immediately went to a book that I read a number of years ago. I've reread several times, Jim Collins' Good to Great. If you have not read that book, I would highly recommend it. So Jim Collins studied businesses that have been successful for a 50-year period or more. They would be businesses that are at that point A on the chart, that have stayed there for over 50 years. And he studied them for a while, and then he developed what he called were some conclusions out of that research. And one of the most important things, or I should say, a model that he developed is what he calls a level 5 leader. And the top characteristic of that leader is personal humility. This is how he defined personal humility. Leaders who demonstrate a compelling modesty, shunning public adulation, never boastful. Leaders who act with quiet, calm determination, relying principally on inspired standards, not inspiring charisma to motivate. In other words, he said, of those companies that were successful for more than 50 years, you didn't even hardly recognize the names of their CEOs. Compare that to a Jack Welch at GE, if you know that story. So Jack was the CEO at GE for, I think, around 20 years, grew GE tremendously. He left and it fell apart. Today, GE is broken up. It's hardly no remnants of the company that it once was, because so much relied on him. And he didn't do what Jim Collins says next: channel ambition into the company, not themselves. They set up successors for even more greatness in the next generation. For those of you in family businesses, and I'm 62, so if you're in my generation, you know, how you set the next generation up for success and when you decide to step off the scene is really important things to think about. If you wait too long, you can drive the next generation away. I have numerous stories I know of friends and family businesses that have done that. The owner can't let go. And Collins says, really good leaders in these companies that have lasted for many, many years, the leaders develop the successors and step aside perhaps before, even while things are still going well. And finally, Jim says, these leaders look in the mirror, not out the window, and take responsibility for poor results, never blaming other people, external factors, or bad luck. Perhaps our biggest opportunity, however, lies with our followers. We all know what IQ is on the right? It's our personal intelligence. Well, I like to call this GQ, group intelligence. How do we develop the intelligence of our group? Here's one of my favorite quotes that I read to myself every morning. Alone I have seen many marvelous things, none of which are true. Alone I have seen many marvelous things, none of which are true. In other words, as leaders, we only see parts of the truth, parts of the growth opportunities available to us. Our followers have ideas that they are not telling us about. I promise you, our followers have ideas for growth that they're not sharing with us. What's our fundamental belief as leaders? Do we believe that we are the smartest person in the room? To lead effectively, we have to humble ourselves and understand that the smartest person in the room is the combined intelligence of the group. The whole is much smarter than the parts. Our job as leaders is to develop a group of people that collectively see all of the opportunities available to us and work to respond to this truth in a way that goes beyond what any individual could do on their own, including us. We have to recognize that in a meeting with our team, we are the elephant in the room. We need to understand as leaders that people often tell us what they think we want to hear, not their truth. Therefore, our responsibility is to find ways to help people speak their truth to us directly, not in the hallway after the meeting with somebody else. So these are two Dutch words some of you may recognize. I grew up with these. My grandmother, Demoed means humility and Gelassenheit means yieldedness. My grandmother used to say to me, the opposite of Demoed is Hochmut. And she would say, now Jim, don't be too Hochmutisch. And I can just still hear her saying that in the back of my mind. That means don't be too prideful, okay? A lot of leaders in our community, I think, represent these two traits of Demoed and Gelassenheit. Again, why are we successful as a community? Why do we have more small businesses than other communities in the state? Why did we come through COVID in a much stronger place than other businesses? I recently read a book called Humble Leadership. Just about a month ago I finished it, by an author who's written a lot of books. He's kind of a famous consultant. And he calls humble leadership a new approach to leadership, a new model for leadership, which I found kind of interesting that he thinks it's a new model. Because in this business, in this community, I think we call it business as usual. And I can't emphasize this enough. And of course, I fall. I fall in this, of course, sometimes, where I'm not humble enough to listen well enough. But I really believe that this is one of the key traits for us in wanting to grow. I think there's opportunities there with our teams that we're not aware of because we haven't created that environment or we haven't been humble enough to listen and accept what they have to say. Ultimately, we don't want to be like the life-saving stations who lost sight of their mission. We want to grow in ways that are mission-focused, where we change our organizations out of strength before we think it needs to. When we keep the feeling small as we grow large, we learn how to divide so that we can multiply. And we do so in a humble way so that we can be successful over the long run. May it be so for each of our organizations today. Thanks.